Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. Guess who I'm with? I'm with Ron Placone, and in place of the miserable liberal, we have another Mexican, Brian Granejo.
Howdy.
Hi,
Howdy,
Brian.
howdy.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
All right. I got to say, you not the stereotypical looking Mexican guy.
Thank you. Yes, I'm like Mitt Romney as a Mexican.
You're like a Mitt Romney Mexican.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Maybe you can run for governor of Michigan sometime. Do you take tiny little steps like Mitt takes when he walks?
I surely do.
You ever see Mitt? When you ever see Mitt Romney watch his little, he takes tiny little steps when he walks. So I don't know if you remember. But this happened not too long ago. Colin Powell, who was the Secretary of State, impeccable reputation. He's an African American who was a Republican, so you know he's got integrity. And so he went in front of the UN, and here's what he said.
Every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
So because he said that, and he had such credibility that everyone accepted, we committed war crimes, meaning we committed a war of aggression. We invaded another country that not only wasn't threatening us, didn't have a way to threaten us, didn't have a missile that could reach us. His army was already decimated. We had decimated his country through sanctions for a decade. And so we invaded Iraq. We invaded Iraq because we're going to liberate them. We're going to liberate them from a brutal dictator. And then we're going to stop him from launching attacks against us.
You know the best part is like people still revel Colin Powell. Like people still describe themselves as Colin Powell Republicans. They're like, yeah, you know, I'm indifferent on social stuff, heavy on defense. Like, okay, does that also mean you're shitty, preemptive, and wrong on defense too? Does it involve that?
So this is from today. They liberated Mosul. Mosul, the biggest ISIS stronghold city, and this is from Ian Bremmer. Mosul liberated.
Looks liberated to me.
Looks liberated. That's also the headline in the New York Times. Iraqi Prime Minister arrives in Mosul to declare victory over ISIS. We won. And it's not funny, all right? It's tragic. But it's funny that people would go there to declare victory. To me, that's a victory. That's the result of Colin Powell lying in front of the UN. That's the result. When he said these aren't assertions, these are facts, that was a lie. They weren't facts. I knew they weren't a fact at that time. The million people protesting knew they weren't facts. You know who didn't know they were facts? Everybody at the Washington Post, everybody at the New York Times except Chris Hedges, everybody at CNN, everybody at MSNBC, except Phil Donahue, and they fired him. So anybody who was calling out the Iraq war got fired. Phil Donahue, Chris Hedges at the New York Times. And everybody got that. Everybody believed Colin Powell. I didn't. Again, the million people protesting the war didn't believe him. Did you believe that they had weapons of mass destruction, that they were a threat to us before the Iraq war? Any of you guys?
I was pretty young, so I wasn't very...
How old were you?
I was still in high school. So I was just more scared that there was going to be like a draft.
Oh, okay.
And I was like worried about my friends and stuff and just didn't want to see a war.
Yeah, I hear you. Brian?
I was steeped in Chomsky by then. I knew just what they were up to. Yeah, they were.
Yeah, but somehow the Washington Post didn't know. Isn't that weird?
Right.
Somehow the New York Times didn't know. Isn't that weird?
Right.
Of course they knew. So and so we created this. This is because of that. That's because of Colin Powell. That's because of Colin Powell. That was a real city. That was a real city. It didn't look like that before. It looked like that after Colin Powell went to the UN, lied, and then we launched a preemptive war. a war of aggression, which is a war crime. You're not supposed to be able to do that. And then we ordered more war crimes to cover it up. If you look at that, people forget why are we in Mosul? Well, because we broke it. We got to fix it. Because we turned Iraq inside out, upside down, and turned it into not a powder keg, an exploded powder keg. It was a powder keg, and we lit it. So so don't forget when you see them talking about Mosul or the fight against ISIS in Iraq or whatever, don't forget, why is this happening? Why did that happen? That's because we did it. We invaded a country that was very fragilely held together by a strongman dictator. And when he did our bidding, he was our friend, and we sold him chemical weapons to use against the Kurds. We did that. And when he wasn't useful to us, we put an embargo on medicine and killed, some people said, 500,000 kids. And we invaded his country. Millions of people displaced, hundreds of thousands of people killed. They're still being killed every day because of what we did. This is still going on. That was 2003. We invaded Iraq. It is still going on, 2017. This is 2017. This is because of that. And here's what the New York Times says about it. The victory marked the formal end of a bloody campaign that lasted nearly 9 months. 9 months that they've been doing this. So just bombing the shit out of that city. Left much of Iraq's second largest city in ruins. Much of Iraq's second largest city in ruins. So that would be like if somebody started bombing United States and left most of Los Angeles in ruins. Los Angeles is the second largest city, right? New York is the biggest city.
New York.
Even though they call Chicago the second city.
Wait, I thought that was Toronto. I'm all mixed up.
Yeah.
Don't listen to me.
It's killed thousands of people and displaced nearly 1 million more. The 9-month assault on Mosul kills thousands of people and displaced nearly 1 million more. So that's still because of us. So the millions of people. Imagine if you had to leave your house right now because someone was going to drop a bomb in your neighborhood. That's what we did. Imagine if you had to leave. Where would you go? How would you find food? Where would you work? How would you get your kids medicine? How would you go? That's what we did. And we did it for oil. Fossil fuels. We did it for money.
I like their use of the word campaign, too.
Yeah.
I think that's noteworthy. Campaign. Like, at this point, bombs are just a rhetorical tool. It's a way of communicating now.
Mosul was the largest city in either Iraq or Syria that was held by the Islamic State, and its loss signifies the waning territorial claims of a terrorist group that, listen to how the New York Times describes this, had its beginnings in the aftermath of the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. Wow. Let's unpack that paragraph, shall we? Mosul was the largest city in either Iraq or Syria. Was the largest city in either Iraq or Syria held by the Islamic State. Why? Who's the Islamic State? You mean ISIS? And why were they holding Mosul? Oh, that's right, because we came in and we overturned their country. So they wouldn't be holding Mosul. Why are they holding Raqqa and Syria? Oh, that's right, because we went in there and are trying to overthrow their government right now. So the reason ISIS was able to have a stronghold in Mosul, and the reason ISIS or the Islamic State was able to conquer Raqqa, that's because of us. That's why. That's because of the United States. When I say us, I mean the United States. Government/military. And I love how they say that the Islamic State's a terrorist group that had a terrorist group. What does that even mean now? A terrorist group. Yeah. A terrorist group? You mean they held the whole city? You mean a terrorist group that had its beginnings in the aftermath of the American, had its beginnings in the aftermath of the, here's how I would write that. The Islamic State, which is a military organization, started in response to the American illegal invasion of and slaughter of Iraqi citizens. That's how I would write that paragraph. That's not how New York Times wrote it at all. That after the American invasion, you mean after the illegal American invasion, after the universally considered a war crime American illegal invasion, that turned out to be false? That they could have written it that way. It's weird how the New York Times still doing the government's bidding. Still. They had its beginnings. I love that's just such a they had its beginnings.
That's their origin story. Yeah. That's when they decided to get together, track those early demos because of that invasion.
Yeah, they're the people who were in the Iraqi army that we overthrew. The Sunnis. Yeah, ISIL, the Sunnis, Islamic State, the Sunnis, the Sunnis who had previously controlled the goddamn country. We came in and overthrew them, and that's where we got ISIS. They didn't have their beginnings after the American invasion. America legally overthrew a government, and that's who they are. America overthrew a government in another part of the world to steal their fossil fuels. And the people left behind are those. The group is also threatened with the loss of its de facto capital, the Syrian city of Raqqa, which is encircled by Arab and Kurdish fighters supported by the United States. Well, we support them today. We might not support them tomorrow. They're doing our bidding today. We might sell somebody gas to bomb the Kurds tomorrow. Who knows? We did it before. Oh, by the way, the rebels in Raqqa, we used to train them and support them. Now I guess we're not anymore. The CIA, the United States. So the same people we're fighting in Mosul, we were training, arming in Syria because we wanted to overthrow Assad. And why are we doing both things? Fossil fuel, baby. Fossil fuel. But the end of the Islamic State's hold on Mosul does not mean peace is at hand. Oh, thank God. Thank God we get to keep fighting. So we're not going to stop fighting. Oh, no. Don't ever think we're going to stop fucking bombing the Middle East. We are not going to stop bombing the Middle East. We ran out of bombs in the Middle East.
It's almost like when you declare war against a vaguely defined enemy like terrorism. You can just keep it going indefinitely. I bet they never thought of that.
So, but the end of the Islamic State's hold on Mosul does not mean peace is at hand. Other cities and towns in Iraq remain under the militants' control. And so we'll be able to keep this stupid war going, probably until your kids have kids. And that's not what it says. And Iraqis expected an increase in terrorist attacks. So after this big victory, there's going to be an increase in terrorist attacks in urban centers, especially in the capital, Baghdad, as the group reverts to its insurgent roots. Insurgents. That's what they call, when you occupy someone else's country with the military, the people fighting you, they call insurgents. Isn't that funny? Not the people they don't call them civilians who live there. They call them insurgents. They're insurging. What does that mean? They're surging, but they're already in there? So they're going to surge in. Insurgents. It was far more brutal than many expected, the fight over Mosul. This is all from the New York Times article. It was far more brutal than many expected, with dense house-to-house fighting and a ceaseless barrage of snipers and suicide bombers. The fight for Mosul was some of the toughest urban warfare since World War II. That's what's going on right now. And why? Because Colin Powell lied to the UN and to the rest of the country. And all the news organizations went along with it, except McClatchy.
I have a question. What were they expecting? It was far more brutal than many expected. Right. Hey, we're going to bomb for 9 months. That sounds brutal. It's not going to be that brutal. Just 9 months of bombing.
Just 9 months.
Won't be that brutal.
We're going to be fighting these people who we've been calling animals, the worst of the worst, some kind of crazy terror, that they don't have any respect for human life, and they control this city. But it was tougher fighting than we thought. What? What? Yeah, it was tougher. We thought they'd just leave. Iraqi officers whose lives had been defined by ceaseless war said the fighting was among the worst they had seen. So this is some brutal shit. It's still happening, and it's still happening because of the United States. The Iraqis and their international partners will now be confronted by the immense challenge of restoring essential services like electricity and repair and rebuilding destroyed hospitals, schools, homes, and bridges, which were wrecked in the ground combat or by the airstrikes, artillery fire, and HIMARS rocket attacks carried out by the American-led coalition to help Iraqi troops advance. Isn't that nice? So those HIMARS rocket attacks, the Americans would do that so that the local Iraqi troops could advance. So we're taking sides in a civil war, and so we're going to use our rockets to, destroy their town. But they call that providing, cover. Oh, my God. So here's the military victory in Mosul has come without a political agreement between Iraq's two largest communities, the Sunnis and Shiite Arabs, whose stark sectarian divisions led to the rise of the Islamic State. That is not what led to the rise of the Islamic State. What led to the rise of the Islamic State is the United States' illegal invasion and slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. That's what led to the rise of the Islamic State. That is what led to the rise of the Islamic State. And don't listen to the fucking New York Times. Lapdogs to power. Fired the only guy who was against the goddamn war at their paper, Chris Hedges. And here they are, 14 years later, still printing bullshit. That's what. Oh, it was the Sunni Shiite. Their stark sectarian division. Did you know that? That's what led to this. It was. It wasn't that. It wasn't us. It was these guys can't get along. All we do is overthrow their government, kill everybody, and then all of a sudden nobody can get along no more.
Well, and I like how a couple paragraphs prior, they kind of subtly hinted at, what you just said.
Yeah.
That, their beginnings happened around the same time of the 2003 invasion. Weird coincidence.
Weird
timing.
Coinky-dinky. For many members of Iraq's minority Sunnis, the Islamic State was seen as a protector against abuses they had suffered under Iraq's Shiite-led government, especially under the former Prime Minister Nuri Kamal. So a lot of people in Mosul were friendly to ISIL or the Islamic State. Why? Because the guy leading the country was a dick to them. Because they used to have a Sunni leader, minority leader, strong man, and then the United States illegally invades their country, overthrows their government, installs a puppet, Malachi, who's now a Shiite, who's actually more friendly to Iran. That's another story. And is brutal to the Sunnis. So the Sunnis, that's what this is. This is a civil war inside Iraq. And while the Islamic State, with its harsh rule, alienated many of the Sunni residents and it sought to represent, residents said its ideology caught on among some of the population, particularly young men. So I guess, again, if you want to know how to create a terrorist, just ask the U.S. military to show up, and we will create terrorists. By the truckload, baby. There is no use in reconstructing the city if the people of Mosul don't change, Miss Abdullah said. There are still many people who assist ISIS, and the acts of violence will never end. Yeah, again, they live there. That's where they live. That's where they live. That'd be the problem. That's the problem in Afghanistan. The Taliban lives there. That's where they live. I don't know what the...
It's almost like if you destroy everything somebody knows and holds dear, they're not going to be happy about it.
Ah! Frankly, I'm desperate over the future, he said. ISIS destroyed the people's mentality, and the wars destroyed the infrastructure, and we paid the price. There is no such thing as the phase after ISIS. ISIS is a mentality, and this mentality will not end with guns alone. That's a Mosul resident said that. Wow. So ISIS destroyed their mentality, and the United States bombs destroyed their infrastructure. And there is the fear that many Islamic State fighters who were not captured or killed had simply, get this, simply put down their guns and blended in with the civilian population to live to fight another day. If you see that movie War Machine, which I did with Brad Pitt, and it's on Netflix, it shows you, they say to Brad Pitt, who's the general, they go, I'm supposed to go into this town and I'm supposed to know who's the friendly people and who's the unfriendly people, and they all look exactly alike. I'm a Marine, I kill. That's what I'm supposed to do. That's in that movie, and it's awesome, and that's exactly what this is. So now the people just take off their uniform and they blend, they shave their beard. Well, here, do you know that most of the ISIS fighters have shaved their beards and took off their clothes, and now they are free? That was a member of Mosul's local council. All they got to do is change their jacket, shave off their beard. They're regular Iraqis, baby. They live there. So here's my last thing from that article. This is from Brigadier General Andrew A. Croft, a senior Air Force officer with the American-led task force that is fighting the Islamic State. You know, the enemy they created. He says Mosul and Raqqa is not the end of it by any stretch of the imagination. So that's right. So just like George Orwell said, this is endless war for endless peace. Why the fuck are we still in Iraq? We're still there. We are still there in Iraq fighting our asses off. And this general says that this is taking over the second largest city in Iraq and winning and freeing the people there, liberating the city of Mosul from the Islamic State. That is not, by any stretch of the imagination, that is not the end of our fighting over there, by any stretch of the imagination. So even if you stretch it this much, that's too much.
And it's a good thing, too, because I don't think we'll ever gain retribution for the events of September the 11th, 2001.
How can we? We'll never get our full bloodlust off of that, right?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like endless war seems appropriate.
I think. So we've had endless war since 9/11. Endless war. It ain't stopping. The New York Times still are fucking mealy-mouthing you what's going on over there. They still won't even tell you that what we did. This is all because of us, baby. This isn't because of the Islamic State. There was no Islamic State till we fucking did this. And we're still doing it. We are still doing it. You want to see what we're still doing in Iraq? Look, we're winning. Look, we're winning.
That's a truly horrifying photograph. I can't imagine an American city looking like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine if that's Chicago or Atlanta or New York City. Imagine if that's New York City. Imagine if that's Los Angeles. Imagine if that's San Francisco. We won. And that's because another country invaded us and ruined our second biggest fucking city. Imagine wouldn't you be a terrorist? What they wouldn't call you'd be a freedom fighter. I'm sure the ISIS people call themselves freedom fighters. That's because of their mainstream news lies to you still, won't tell you the truth, is a lapdog to power. That's what this is, and they're still doing it. And they're doing it right now. They're trying to get us in a war with Russia. They're doing it right now. They're still doing it. Nowhere in this article does it mention that, oh yeah, by the way, this was all because of what we did illegally. And by the way, no one went to jail for that. So when another country does something, we better hold them accountable. We better start a war because Russia hacked the fucking DNC's emails. We better start a war over that. But nobody even goes. We never even had a fucking hearing about the Iraq war. Do you know that? They never even went like, hey, let's see who we should hold accountable for this big fuck up. Never. Nothing. Hey, maybe we should impeach the president for lying us. And Nancy Pelosi says impeachment's off the table. They impeached the Democrat over a fucking blowjob.
Yeah, the only person that even had the courage to bring up impeachment was Dennis Kucinich.
Yes.
He was the only one. He wrote that thing. Everybody ignored him. Nobody had his back.
And nowhere in this New York Times news article will it give you a clue as to why this is happening, how it got started. Nowhere. But they will let you know it has to keep going on forever. And they never. But I will say this: they did actually quote some people who lived there. So that's really rare. They almost never quote people who live there. They almost always quote the military and the government officials, so they had, from what I could tell, 2 people who live in Mosul who weren't friendly to ISIS, by the way. There you go. Isn't that, look, it's. So there you go. It's liberated. Hey, the next live Jimmy Dore show is July 17th. That's right, July 17th. That's a Monday in Burbank, California. Get your tickets right down here or go to jimmydorecomedy.com. July 17th, Burbank, California, live Jimmy Dore show.